Things are always hot when you got another Orange alum in the house. Ian, Ailey, Andrew, and Riley alongside Ahmed Fareed of NBC Sports. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Been in for 24 hours. Have gotten into zero trouble. Not that I expected to, but it was Vegas last year. Got into zero trouble in Vegas.
Good.
Was also there for 24 hours, so not enough time. But no, it's awesome. I love the energy of Radio Row, and you guys have now seen it too. It's just like there are so many people here that you see, and you're like, I recognize that person. Now I'm terrible with names, and my memory is not that great, so I was like, I don't know exactly where, but you just see so many people in this business, and you realize how small the business is because you're like, everyone. You've kind of seen everyone everywhere, and it's cool to see.
Do you have prior experiences of troubles at the Super Bowl?
No, I don't. I was here in 2013 when the 49ers were playing the Ravens. I was working out in San Francisco in the regional network then, and my biggest memory is that I was underneath in the stadium start of the second half, and the whole lights go out in the media room, and I'm like, oh, this is a bummer. I can't watch the game right now, not knowing that the lights went out in the entire stadium and that the game was not continuing. And so that was like the weirdest moment I've had covering a Super Bowl, but no, it's like – New Orleans is fun. I love that the NFL does it. It's like the whole business comes together, the football community, the media community comes together, and parties in some of the best American cities. It's so awesome.
You mentioned the lights going out. Can you kind of walk people through? Obviously, that was the last Super Bowl here in New Orleans. What your experience was of all of that?
Yeah, so I was here at the Super Bowl. I couldn't believe it. I had just started the job out in San Francisco, and the 49ers made the Super Bowl, and they go, Ahmed, one of your first responsibilities is to cover your first Super Bowl ever. And so I go, that's awesome. And I got out here, and within a day and a half, I was on Bourbon Street with someone juggling knives, standing on a bowling ball over me. And so I was like, oh, that's my role here. I will be that, and which was awesome. And I still am that role to this day. So we did that for the week, and I did stories all around, went to a psychic. It was the best week ever. And then once the game started, it's so surreal because it's unlike any other game you've been to because the crowd is a little more quiet, right? More corporate crowd. You don't necessarily you're packed with diehard fans because it's just not the way the event is set up. So the atmosphere in the buildings, the buzz is a little different. And then I'm working it, and you're all worried about, okay, what are we doing after? If they win, what do we do here? Where do I got to be? And so I was underneath, the lights go out, and at that point I was just like, all right, well, this is going to be unlike anything I've ever covered in the past. But it's one of those things where at the end of the game, you do your interviews, you're standing on the field, you can't believe it. You're like, when I was at Syracuse, this is exactly what I dreamed of, right? That one day you'd be literally standing on the field right after the Super Bowl on the field. They played the Super Bowl on. It was the coolest thing ever. I was like, all those Professor Nicholson classes and everything I took and the newspaper journalism is all worth it because I got to stand on the Super Bowl field there just like 10 or 15 years after that.
So when you said you were in New Orleans and the lights went out, you're in the media room, and you didn't know it went out in the dome,
yeah.
Were you not watching? Where were you?
Our TVs went out. Everything went out in the media room, so we had no contact with the outside world. And so I just thought it was like someone pulled a plug in the media room, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll have to go out to the stadium.
Is there no windows?
There were no windows.
You're not
it was like in the bowels,
like
the bowels of the stadium. We were on the TVs, but once the power went out, it was like we had no outside communication. I was just like, all right, well, I guess I gotta get out of these arenas. Like the crazy thing about it is you cover a Super Bowl or World Series that I've done a couple of them. Like you'd think it's just like, oh, these accommodations are the greatest ever. No, you're in like a basement, and it's just like there's like cement walls around you, and there's water leaking on the ground. It's like you're literally in a basement in these stadiums with cables. It's a miracle this stuff works as much as it does. So that's where we were. We were in a basement, probably in standing water, and the power went out, and I was just like, well, this is a bummer. It's like I'm back home in Michigan because I think this happened a couple times back home.
Since you opened up the can of worms.
Yeah.
And I know I hit you with it right before we got on the air.
Yeah.
You are a Michigan guy.
I am.
And while the Eagles, great team, and a lot of people expected them to get to this point, a lot of people also expected the Detroit Lions to maybe get to this point. Your thoughts on not just how their season wrapped up, but another really great year under Dan Campbell, Jared Goff, and the rest of that team.
It was, and I don't appreciate you bringing it up. Yeah. It is too soon, and maybe I'll be able to talk about it next year at this. It was such a fun year. And you talk about sports fandoms. I think the best thing for any fan is to have a team that sucks for a long time. Because, yeah, those years are terrible.
Our producer, Stella, is a Bears fan.
There we go. We're
you.
top rivals. So we have a lot in common, too. You know, we don't like each other, but we can relate with each other. Because that is what builds the super fan. That if you're still with the team after 10 years of being terrible, you are with them forever. And so that's what Bears fans, that's what Browns fans. I got a friend who's a Browns fan who went to ESF, the landscape school there, right next door to you guys. So it's like this year was so awesome because it was so unlike anything I had ever experienced, even from last year. And the team is better than ever because it was so expected this year, and they delivered. And that offense was as good, if not better, than we thought. And so when it was all done, and I'm sitting there, and I'm going to be honest, there was some moisture up in the above the nose area after it was all said and done because the season was so fun. And watching it with my 10-year-old son now, who's now a Lions fan because they're good. And I was like, hey, this is our team. And he's like, all right, yeah, I'll root for this team. It was just such a fun year. And then it, like anything in the playoffs, it ends so abruptly. But I am trying to have the perspective of, man, there were so many good moments, and I'm so glad that year happened and try to focus on that and forget, unless I'm asked about it at Radio Row, how it all ended.
I'm just trying to get the Central New York audience to buy in on the Lions, too.
Oh.
And, you know, you're the person that's
I
going to
was a Buffalo fan, though, while I was at Syracuse. Like, they had Doug Flutie, which was a really fun team to watch while I was there, and they were all the games on TV. It's like they didn't have all the red zone and stuff like that back in the day. So, yeah, I did like Buffalo when I was at Syracuse, and I got into them. But, yeah, we could always use more support, Lions country.
Yeah, it's kind of either you're a Lions – if you're a Lions fan, you've been really bad for a long time.
Yep.
Now you're finally good. Maybe you have a chance to get the Super Bowl. Bills have been really good for several years now, and they also can't get to a Super Bowl. Not sure which is worse to be, but –
So I think like the Ravens are the classic example to me, and the Bills too, I guess. You know, the Bills have had they're both the same, I guess. Those seasons where it doesn't really matter until you get to the playoffs, and now you can argue that's going to be the case for the Lions next year. I think those are some of the hardest years for any fan because you can't really enjoy the regular season because it's like, all right, we've been there, done that. We've had these really good regular seasons before. Of course, it's fun to win those games, but you know, at the end of the day, it all comes down to what you do in the playoffs. And if you don't get it done in the playoffs, you have that here we go again feeling. So I think those are like the 0-16 season for the Lions. That was difficult. Yes, that was probably more difficult. But these ones where you have such high expectations and it only matters what you do in the playoffs, I think those are pretty difficult too.
I think that's why Yankee fans are so miserable. I mean, they haven't won a championship since maybe
there's other reasons too. If you're a Yankee, I feel like a little bit, right?
I mean, I am.
You have this perception of what you should be.
Yes.
And you haven't quite been that. Like a Cowboys fan, too, right?
Yes. Luckily, we have none of those at our table.
Yeah.
So, yes. But my uncle from Connecticut somehow ended up in that camp because some people just want to join that camp.
That's a good reminder. There are multiple ways to be miserable as a sports fan, and you can find them at any point, no matter which team you root for sure.
It's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
So you are here because of the podcast that you do with Chris Sims, Unbuttoned, and like you said, each of the last 2 years, you guys have taken the show on the road.
Yep.
And how cool was it just to get – I mean, obviously, Chris will talk football anywhere, anytime.
All the time.
But how cool is it to do it on the road, keep things fresh, and to do it with the backdrop being the biggest game in the sport?
It's fun because, honestly, it's fun for me because I do the podcast. I've been doing it for 6 years, I think, with Chris. And I have so much respect for what he does and the homework he does. I don't think anyone does more homework. In fact, I know that no one does more homework than Chris. He is grinding on film all the time during football season. Complains about how much he does it, but then does it even more because he just has that desire to do it. And so he has this depth of knowledge that's not surface level. And as you guys know, it's just like we have enough surface level stuff. And that's why some of the hot take artists do stand out because it's like, okay, this is actually a little different than what else is out there. So it's like you can either be hot takey or you can do the work and really grind and really have an expertise. Of course, like if I did the work on looking at film, I still wouldn't be able to get the expertise that Chris does because he played. He's been around it his whole life. He sees things differently than I do. And so working with Chris is like a cheat code. you get to the root causes of why some of these teams are struggling and why this guy's successful and why this guy's better than that guy. And so being able to do that here and then seeing all the people come around our booth coming up to Chris all the time and saying, hey, will you have time this week? We want to have you on our show. And he says yes to all those people. It's like I think it's cool just for me to be able to watch Chris and someone who really does the work, whose NFL career did not go the way he wanted it to and has grown up with Phil Simms as his dad, carve out such a great niche for himself in this business that's the coolest part for me here at Radio Row.
Talking about the different types of broadcasters, what do you want your identity to be as a broadcaster?
Oh, good question. Partly I think you can't dictate that, right? And so it's like you might want it, you might not get it. What I hope people see when they watch me on TV is I hope they see someone that they think is doing the show for them, right? It's like I think sometimes in this business we do the shows for ourselves. I want to say the right thing. I want to make the right joke at the right time so people will think I'm funny. And all that's part of the business and entertainment. It's like you got to amp it up. I mean, we're in a performance business. As much as we are like nuts and bolts and reporting and journalism, we're in an art business too and trying to make an entertaining show. So that's always going to be part of it. But I want to always remember that when I'm doing anything in the show, is this what the people at home want to see? Am I making a joke to try to make me look funny, or is it going to be something that the people at home will laugh about? And so hopefully that when we're doing a show, and I try to do this with all the analysts that I have now, is that I say as a host of a show, I'm vibe control. I try to get us to the way we're supposed to be in the questions and interesting topics, but at the same time, it should be a fun hang. And we all should get along. Because if we get along and we're having a fun time and we have some inside jokes together that are also inside with the audience at home, then they're going to feel like they're part of the crew. I think that's the magic of Inside the NBA, is that those guys have such a fun time together, and they have jokes together, but they let the audience in on every single one of them. And I think that's the secret sauce to like doing sports TV right now.
You've obviously covered the Super Bowl before, as we talked about.
Yeah.
Where does that rank in terms of your favorite events that you've gotten to cover over your career?
I mean, it's up there for most memorable. But I'll say this, and I worked in local sports for 10 years, my first 10 years, I think. A couple years in Lansing, and then 6 in Virginia, so 8 years. I could have retired at those jobs and been very happy. I thought it was cool to be the local sports guy, and people grow up and be like, I've been watching you since I was a kid, and now I'm 55, and stuff like that. I think that's a cool life to have. So I never thought of like, okay, I got to get out of Lansing, Michigan, so I can get to a place where I can cover a Super Bowl. So I don't want to make it sound like I don't appreciate all this stuff, and it's awesome to cover San Francisco Giants at the World Series, and they're so memorable. But after a while, you're just like, what do you like most about this business? And it is delivering for your audience, and you can do that no matter where you are. So I love the fact that I've got to come to the Super Bowl. I love the fact that I'm here right now and get to see this whole thing. What a cool life. But if it ended tomorrow and they say, Ahmed, you got to go back to doing local news somewhere and you'll be the guy for the next 20 years, I'll be like, that sounds cool too. I didn't really answer your question, but that's kind of the way I look at it, because I feel like, doing the Olympics in Paris this past summer, amazing. And I'll never forget it. What an opportunity. But would my career and my life have been complete without doing that? Absolutely. So it's just like, I try not to get too hung up on the next big event that I want to be covering.
That's great perspective.
You have been a vibe controller for a new program on NBC over the last couple of years, with college basketball now being a part of the fold. I know we were just talking about it when we were walking over here. How fun is it and I know you mentioned Inside the NBA is something that all studio shows try to take a little bit of inspiration from, but to build an organic chemistry of your own with the analysts that you have on that show, how fun has that been?
It's the best. And I think if you have the privilege of starting a show from scratch, which we did there, we hadn't done college basketball for years at NBC, and then we had this Peacock property, you can, from the get-go, set the creative vibe of the show. And I knew when we started it, I was like, all right, these guys know basketball, and that's number one. It's like, these guys are smart. They'll say smart things, so we're not just a bunch of 3 goofballs like bozos goofing off up here. So they know their stuff. So now we can have a little fun with each other. We can push the boundaries. I say this about TV a lot of times. If you're just getting into TV, you need to learn the rules of TV. When am I supposed to talk? When am I not supposed to talk? How long am I supposed to go? And then once you do that, you need to learn how to break the rules of TV. And so you can do it in fun and creative ways so that it's not just so cookie cutter and it's a template, ways that bring the audience in. And so I feel like we've been able to do that in our 2 years, and then you have running gags that happen. But at the end of the day, you have to have passion about what you're covering. And so those guys do. And those guys, Jordan Cornette, Notre Dame basketball, career leader in block shots, loves this stuff, watches this stuff, has super opinionated on this, good and bad. And that's part of his personality, and we bring that out. Josh Pastner loves college basketball. So if you have people that you're working with that absolutely love the sport. We had the same thing when we had MLB Sunday Leadoff when I was working with Nick Swisher and we were traveling on the road. I love baseball. He obviously loves baseball. If you love it, learn the rules of TV, execute shows, have fun with it, because I think more times than not, your audience will kind of appreciate that show.
That's awesome. I've obviously been around Josh Pastner. We were talking off the air about this as a Georgia Tech guy, and you've got guys with the right energy, it seems, in that.
Yeah.
How do you, as the host and the guy that kind of blends it all together, how do you analyze what each guy is going to bring, and how do you make sure that it all works well together?
So sometimes you do it after the fact. You go, hey, we're getting a little long. Right? Let's pass the ball a little bit more here. Let's make sure our points are crisp and concise. You'll get your point again. So some of it comes after the show. Like I know last year at times we would do highlights, and those guys are great because when we have a highlight, I don't have to read it word for word. Oh, he passes to him, and this makes it a 7-point game. They can go big picture on some of the highlights to where it's just like, hey, here's Tennessee, quick start in this game. And they're like, I love what Tennessee brings. They got legit 7 guys who can all score double figures in a game. Great context where the pictures are more, background and we're not doing play-by-play. But then it can go too far to where you're like, all right, the pictures are a little – that game was good at the end, and we kind of just glossed over talking about big-picture ideas. So this highlight – make sure that if the game is close that we're doing a little more play-by-play at the end of the highlights. So it's just things like that, right? And then at the same time making sure that – they're letting it fly. They're not holding anything back. And I'm lucky with those guys because they don't. And so it's just like if you've got that kind of chemistry going, you just lean into what works with those guys.
And you've talked about the kind of chemistry you have with all your different teams and the people you get to work with. Is there any specific fun stories of any of the sports you've gotten to cover with your partners on the road and studio?
There are so many. I mean, the Kentucky Derby is amazing. It seemed like the first couple of years that I covered it, it rained every time, and we're all in ponchos. And it's just like such a bummer because everyone's all dressed for the Kentucky Derby, and then everyone's got like this white plastic over their body. It's just like, well, that's a huge bummer. It's like specific stories. I mean, it's just like it seems like it's so many now. I'm sure like Paris is crazy. So you like. NBC is spending multi-billion dollars on the Paris Olympics. And so there's a certain level of pressure that goes along with that because you know that your company has spent over $1 billion to put on this event. And if you screw up a segment, you feel like you've cost the company money. So you do want it to go well. And so you put a lot of pressure on yourself early. But this is what can happen behind the scenes. You realize that we're all just trying to make it work, is that it rained so much. You remember the opening ceremony? It's like raining all day, and it was heavy rain for Paris, more rain than they'd gotten in a long time. It was a mess. We're in a studio, and these studios are just built by the Olympic Committee for this 2-week stretch, and they'll tear down these studios when we're done. The studio they built, the floor above was the BBC, and it wasn't built quite as well as normal, and so there was a leak of water that was able to get through the roof of the BBC, get through their floor, and then through the roof of our NBC. And so here we are. I feel the pressure. I'm in Paris. I'm on NBC. I'm coming on after the opening ceremony, millions of people watching. And we go, hey, Ahmed, we need you to move over in this corner of the studio because we have a leak coming down in the roof over here. And so we have a bucket. We have paper towels over there. And so that actually made me a little more relaxed because I was like, okay, all right, it's not that big a deal. We have a leak in the roof. It's like this stuff like this happens. So it's like you're reminded often and I say this to people, like, what's the biggest difference between local news? You're at a regional sports network, and then you're at big NBC. And I go, not that much. Really not that much. It's like you got to do the same thing. You write your stuff, you say it on TV, you try to have some fun, and you do that at all different levels. And so it's a good reminder every once in a while that don't take the job too seriously, don't take yourself too seriously. This is still sports, and sometimes you get a leak in the roof. So, yeah.
The audience might change, but you can't change. And that's the most important part about it in terms of navigating the wild career that is sports broadcasting. Yeah. This week it's brought you to New Orleans, or at least it does today.
Yep.
And to bring it back to the game at hand, I know you just got done talking with Chris about probably this game and all the storylines around the NFL. What is your favorite storyline headed into this Super Bowl? Is it one that you think everybody is talking about, or maybe one of the more under-the-radar ones that, in that podcast format you guys were able to slip in there?
Yeah. I think my favorite storyline is that everyone looks at the Chiefs as this dynasty, which they are, inevitable force, back to back to back. You're like, okay, dominant team in the NFL. Where I think, and maybe this is coming from Chris, because usually I steal my ideas from Chris. He's too smart not to. You look at, on paper and on the field, the Eagles are probably the better team. Right, I mean, they're stacked on the offensive line. They got studs on defense. The rookies are playing awesome with Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Their defensive line is amazing. Jalen Carter is one of the best defensive tackles. He can ruin a game himself.
Yeah.
And so you look pound for pound, Saquon Barkley, of course, on offense. A.J. Brown can go off for 150. So I think that's my favorite storyline, is that while the Chiefs are going to be looked at as one of the most dominant teams and most accomplished teams in NFL history for a 10-year period, I think the Eagles are better in this one, but I don't know that anyone will really people will talk about them that way, but if Kansas City wins, it's probably going to be Patrick Mahomes doing some Patrick Mahomes things again. It's going to be Andy Reid scheming up a couple plays. It's going to be a quote-unquote underdog-ish team again getting it done that's just now won 3 back-to-back-to-back. So I think that's cool. It's like you get a David and Goliath, but it might not be the David or Goliath that you thought when this game started. So, I would have loved to see my Lions here in this game, but I think this is going to be super close, super competitive, and I think it should come down to the end.
We had Zach Berman, Newhouse alum, Eagles beat reporter, on with us earlier today.
He just contradicted everything I said?
No, he was talking about how he feels like compared to 2 years ago, the talent has shifted a little bit to where it's probably on the Eagles' side in terms of roster and who has the better team. But Patrick Mahomes on the other side, it's hard to ever pick against that guy. Where do you stand on the Patrick Mahomes greatest of all time conversation, and pending what happens on Sunday, where that shakes out?
It depends on who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to Tom Brady, I'm like, Tom, you're the best of all time. If I'm talking to a Chiefs fan, I go, hey, Mahomes, no, not even a question. I don't get too much into that. I think it's fun to debate, and like you can make your arguments either way. Like Brady's never won 3 in a row, but he's also got more. I think Patrick Mahomes does things, obviously, that Brady couldn't do, but I think Brady probably does things that Patrick couldn't do. He might have a stronger arm. I'm not totally sure about that, but his leadership, the things he does on the field, the nuances of playing the position, making his teammates around him better, I think, so it's like I don't get into that too much because I think that's more of a talk show thing. I think it's interesting to talk about, and, of course, the fans like to talk about it, but he's obviously one of the greatest of all time, and he's just so fun to watch because I love that you can see players and teams do things in a different type of way. And Patrick continues to be able to excel at a high level. And I think the Chiefs, when you talk about strength of a team, I think the Chiefs last year are better than the Chiefs this year. But the Chiefs this year just know how to win all those close games, at least they have so far. And Patrick's been a big part of that.
And I think people are forgetting in that argument, whether you like to engage in it or not.
Yeah.
Joe Montana, hello.
Yeah.
I mean, it took a while for the general public to actually say, okay, Tom Brady has ascended over Joe Montana.
Yeah.
But now Patrick Mahomes, maybe it's just because Brady's career ended and now he's in broadcasting, so he's still in the middle of everything that is the NFL. And Joe Montana, I mean, I know you weren't there when he was winning those Super Bowls, but you were in the Bay Area
legend.
for such.
Yeah.
I mean, he is still one of the greatest winners in all of sports.
Yeah, it was one of those where you're like, okay, he will never be passed. It'll be like a Michael Jordan thing, where it's just like everyone will just always agree that Joe Montana was the greatest quarterback we have ever seen, and everyone's playing for second place, and that obviously has changed. And yeah, I mean, Joe Montana, awesome. And to do it with not the strongest arm too, is just like knew the position, knew how to play it. Bill Walsh, they were the perfect tandem together. Played the position at an elite level. But yeah, it is funny. Like you mentioned that, like in this business, and if anyone listening to sports broadcasting, and I try to stay away from it as much as I can, but I still fall into it. It's like there is so much, groupthink on all of it that it's hard to get away from that sometimes. It's like we'll do the draft here, the draft analysis, and Chris gets hammered every year because his draft ranking where everyone has a guy at 1, he has him at 3.
He is not afraid to do that.
But when you think of it in the grand scheme of things, that's such a slight difference. Like he had Marvin Harrison at 3 in his rankings behind Malik Neighbors and behind Brian Thomas. And what happened? Malik Neighbors had an awesome year, and Brian Thomas was amazing for Jacksonville, and Marvin Harrison was okay. And now here we are a year later where some people might say, I'd rather have Xavier Worthy on my team than Marvin Harrison, where if Chris had said that back then 12 months ago, you're just going for clicks again. So you do try to stay away from the groupthink. Sometimes it's impossible because everyone thinks Joe Montana. How are you going to be the guy that's going to say Joe Montana was not that good? But I think that's where the interesting discussions do land. It's just like, all right, everyone has said this for so long. Is it true? Are we sure? Have we just now accepted it as fact because we've talked about it for so long? I think there's where some interesting conversations can be had.
New Orleans, that's where the interesting conversation are being had right now.
At table 56.
Yep. The table to be at.
Yeah.
Z89's table here at the Super Bowl, and right now it's been with Ahmed Fareed. Thank you so much for joining us, taking a little bit of time out of your quick trip here, and
of course,
best luck getting back up to Connecticut and with all the college basketball coverage and everything else that you got going on.
I love seeing you guys, and you've grown in numbers since last year. And Syracuse gave me so much, and I think I probably said this last time too, but it was the confidence that you could do it. It's it's like you've seen other people go through the school, and they've grinding and they've worked hard, and Syracuse is blessed by some of the most motivated and high-achieving students that want to get into sports broadcasting going to their school for sports broadcasting. And so while Syracuse was awesome and served me really well, I feel like they're lucky to have you guys there too, because you guys are all motivated and want to do a good job. And so, no, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
And we're lucky to have Syracuse too. We wouldn't be there without them.